The movie opens with a man slowly waking up in a cube-shaped room with a distinct design. He seemed to have no idea where he is, where to go, or how he got there. The man inspects a couple of doors that open up like a vault, looks through carefully, sees different colored rooms, says, "Nope," and goes to another door. Here he realizes that there are different colors in different rooms. The man finally chooses one, and as soon as he takes a step into it, he gets sliced into countless tiny pieces by what looks like a trap in the room. Then we're taken into another room, and we see a man who looks like he's losing his sanity as he climbs inside the room, while another man lies down, seemingly passed out. Another door opens, and the man hides and quickly grabs whoever comes from the other side, which is revealed to be a helpless woman. The three people look delirious, paranoid, and exhausted. They hear screams for help coming from the room next door and find a helpless young girl. The man rushes to her and reveals that the rooms are booby-trapped and they have to be cautious moving around. Another random old man climbs down into the room from the room next door and takes his boot off, seeming to know what he's doing. It's a party in this cube now, but not a fun one. The woman tends to the man named Worth, who's passed out on the ground. This is when we find out she is a doctor. The wise old man who entered earlier throws his boot into a room to check for booby traps, and it gets incinerated immediately. He tells the others that there are motion detectors in the rooms activating the traps. Now the group takes a second to assess the situation they found themselves in. No one can recall how they got here, and they slowly think of the last thing they can remember. Each person is conveniently wearing a prison uniform with their names printed on them. Holloway comes up with a conspiracy about aliens, but Quentin tells her they need to focus. Renan and Quentin seem to be the logical ones leading the group in taking action. Quentin says if there was a way in, there's gotta be a way out. They decide to use the boots to find the traps and avoid trapped rooms until they find an exit. But Worth confidently says it can't be that simple and that no one is coming to help. Ren interjects to say that they are being watched. At this point, Levin starts to panic, but again Quentin comforts her and reveals that he is a cop. The group begins to make their way through the maze before they suddenly hear a loud rumbling noise. Ren tells them that it's a mechanical noise that comes at regular intervals, which reveals not only his awareness of what's around him, but that he has been in the maze longer than the rest. This is when the group discovers numbers plated on each room, but they don't know its significance yet. But as exhaustion from the heat sets in, the group suddenly starts panicking about food and water. Ren appears unaffected as he throws a boot inside another room. Even though it doesn't trigger any traps, he says the room smells funny and not to go in there. He explains that there are molecular chemical sensors that won't be set off by the boots, which makes Quentin suspicious of Ren's seemingly infinite knowledge of sensors and traps. He figures out that the man is the Ren, a world-famous escape artist who escaped from 7 prisons. Ren then reveals his true self, telling them that the only reason he's keeping them around is because he needs their boots. He launches into a speech about how to survive, before ironically suddenly dying. Ren triggers an electrochemical trap and acid sprays on his face. Screaming, he goes back to the room with his face is melted off. Worth looks in disgust and anger, but remains quiet. Then Quentin says they have to reassess the place, saying they can't see the big picture from the inside, so they must assess what's right in front of them. Contemplating the maze, Quentin realizes that Holloway is a doctor, he's a cop, and Ren is an escape artist, meaning each of them must possess a special skill or function. But when he asks Levin, she says she's insignificant. Holloway asks what the machine wants or what it's thinking, referring to those who created this maze and may be watching. Worth says, 1 down, 4 to go, before revealing he just works in an office. Quentin rallies the group saying that he has 3 kids and they're his reason for fighting. Strangely, Holloway is infuriated because the people behind the maze stole her clothes and all her jewelry. This causes Quentin to ask Levin about her glasses, which she says are for reading. He concludes that they put them on her for a reason since nothing here is random. After looking at the room numbers, Quentin unexpectedly guesses that Levin studies math, which for some reason she didn't think was important enough to share. Now that Levin looks at all the rooms again, she figures out that the rooms with prime numbers are all booby-trapped. She sums up her accomplishment by saying she has a brain for numbers, but not for logic apparently. Isn't it odd that she didn't share this ability with the group even though patterns and room numbers are the only clues they have to get out of the maze? Anyways, the group uses her theory to advance through the rooms. Levin asks how long they'd been there, and Quentin uses the length of his beard to determine that it was around 9 or 10 hours. Feeling his beard, he says the last thing he remembers doing was shaving. Then he says he plans to make it home for dinner, to which Levin unexpectedly replies that if they get out, she'll make him dinner. Honestly, this flirtation between a 30-year-old man with 3 kids and a college student would be the real torture for me if I was part of the group. Meanwhile, Holloway is stressed out and Quentin suggests having a conversation to keep her mind occupied. He shares that he has 3 boys, ages 9, 7, and 5, and that he is separated from his wife. Then Quentin turns to Worth asking him for some help keeping the group intact, but he refuses and moves along. For the first time, Quentin tries to open the top door and a new person falls inside. Immediately, the new man goes to the wall and starts banging his head against it, which is when Holloway says that he is mentally handicapped. The group is shocked that a person like him would be in the maze, clearly helpless and unable to think for himself. The group is reluctant to keep him around, but Holloway says she'll look out for him. His name tag says Kazan, so they take Kazan with him as they carry on through the maze. This is when Quentin begins to speculate to Holloway that the maze was made by some rich guy who watches them for his sick entertainment. When she scoffs at his idea, he stares at her contemptuously as if he wants to rip her neck off. But his anger is interrupted by Kazan screaming at the sight of a red room as if he has a bad feeling about it. So Quentin jumps into a different room, but it turns out to be booby-trapped even though the numbers aren't prime. He barely manages to evade the trap, and is now even more angry and aggressive with the rest of the group. Given that he almost died in a room which both Levin and Worth inspected, he's even more paranoid now. Quentin accuses Worth of knowing that the room was trapped, and Levin argues that her number system isn't wrong despite the mishap, just that there's more to the system than she thought. Since they can't do much else, they decide to rest while Levin tries to decipher the number system. But at this point, Quentin is so frustrated with Worth's uselessness and the fact that he's laughing at the situation that he tries to order him around. But Worth mocks him instead, which probably isn't the best idea in this sort of situation. So in response, Quentin says that someone has to take control of the situation and lead, but Worth disagrees. A heated argument breaks out, but it turns out that Quentin is trying to bait Worth into getting angry enough to slip up and reveal any information he's hiding. So he challenges his character, saying he has no backbone, and carefully waits for Worth to take the bait. Quentin continues rattling Worth until he finally blurts out that there is no way out. Upon hearing that, the group surrounds Worth, and he reveals that he is the engineer who designed the outer shell of the maze. So it looks like Quentin's paranoia turned out to be right. Worth starts saying that he knows nothing else about the place, and he was only contracted to build an outer hollow shell of a cube. Other people worked on similar small parts, but no one knew what it was they were building. Here, Holloway interjects, saying that she has been right her whole life and that this is clearly a government conspiracy. It seems this torture chamber has validated her lifelong belief in conspiracy theories and distrust of the government. But Worth says this place has no purpose, that it only has any meaning if people are put inside it, otherwise it's just a useless waste of resources. At this point, Quentin clearly seems to be losing his sanity by the second. So when Worth triggers Quentin just one more time, he snaps. He starts beating him and only stops when Levin tells him that they need him to survive. He agrees to keep him because of his knowledge about the cube. Then Worth tells Levin that there is one door out there that leads outside, and that the outer shell is 434 feet square. Using this, Levin calculates that the cube is 26 rooms high and 26 rooms across, which means the entire cube consists of 17,576 rooms. Suddenly, Levin has an epiphany. Levin figures out that they are using Cartesian coordinates, which are like markers in a 3D map. She says that they are 7 rooms from the edge. Quentin tries to get Worth to jump into the rooms first, but Holloway says they will take turns. Eventually, Levin is stuck in between rooms when she tells Quentin, who is weirdly close to her, that the coordinates exceed the room limits and that they should be outside the cube if they were right. That's when they find a room triggered by sound, which is a problem given that Kazan is still around. Quentin suggests that they cross this room anyway since they have no other plans and their resources are running out. Happily, he tells Worth that it's his turn to cross and demands they leave Kazan behind. The rest of the group agrees with him, but Holloway shames all of them for even considering the idea. She asks them, "What are you turning into?" A sign that the group is clearly losing their humanity. Worth guarantees them that Kazan will be quiet, and one by one they climb through the room. Worth leads them, and Quentin is visibly very annoyed that he survives. After him, Levin and Holloway follow, then Kazan, who starts climbing the wrong way and gets his pants stuck on the handle. Luckily, Holloway stops him before he starts screaming and brings him in. Finally, Quentin goes, but panics when he sees the door handle spinning and clicking. As he braces for the inevitable, nothing happens. He is relieved, but Kazan lets out a laugh that triggers the trap. Quickly, Quentin jumps inside and is enraged. He demands they get rid of Kazan, and he doesn't give up until Holloway calls him a Nazi. Immediately, he redirects his anger towards her, telling her the only reason she exists is because I keep you. Then and there, Quentin's true colors are revealed and he loses the support of even Levin. "No wonder your wife left you, all that bottled up anger, and a thing for young girls," Holloway says to him. Finally, someone noticed, and Quentin strikes her in a rage. He looks completely unhinged by now, and Holloway takes it a step further, asking him if he smacks his kids as well. Levin breaks the tension by asking if anyone else is interested in what's on the other side of the door. Worth opens the door, revealing the edge of the cube and look out into the abyss, but they can't see any way across. Quentin tells them to make a rope out of their clothes and swing to look into the other side. Because Quentin is the heaviest, they agreed he can't go, so Holloway goes instead. They all take their uniforms off, and Holloway swings down, but as she swings, the structure shakes again and she falls. Heroically, Quentin jumps to save her, only to look her in the eye and drop her in cold blood. Here you might be wondering why he jumped to save her in the first place, and honestly, me too. Returning to the group, Quentin says that he tried to save her but she slipped. He urges Levin to keep cranking numbers, but she says her brain can't take it anymore. When Worth says they need to sleep, Quentin orders just 1 hour. Mockingly, Worth asks him how he can tell how long an hour is, to which Quentin replies, "An hour is as long as I say." At this point, he is a full-on ruthless dictator. While they sleep, Quentin steals the remaining boot and kidnaps Levin. Her mind is hazy, and he tells her that he will get her to safety, saying she's the mind and he's the muscle, so they need to work together. Things are getting weird really fast as he goes into unsettling territories about Levin, suggesting they both fit together in the equation. Levin is afraid and Quentin begins to grab at her, but suddenly Worth arrives just in time to push him off and tell him to stay away from her. If it wasn't clear before, it's incredibly obvious now that Quentin has lost his mind. He starts saying the rest are spies and that Holloway had information about his family and crossed the line. Now everyone else realizes that he dropped her on purpose. Quentin beats up Worth again before grabbing him and throwing him down a door. After landing on the ground, Worth starts laughing hysterically. Out of fear or desperation, the group follows Quentin only to discover that they are back in the room Ren died in. Realizing they've been going around in circles and are back at square one, Quentin loses it and demands Levin figure out the numbers.
The numbers, Mason. What do they mean?
But Levin hits back, calling him a murderer and saying that he hasn't done anything useful except shout orders this whole time. Finally, Quentin loses hope and breaks down in tears. This is when Worth notices that the room where Ren was killed isn't there anymore. The group realizes that they weren't the only ones moving, the rooms had been moving too. Suddenly, Levin looks at the numbers saying you use permutations to map moving coordinates. She recalls that the exit room was the room with a coordinate larger than 26, which had originally confused her. Then she reveals that the room moves outside of the cube eventually, but only in its original position. This means that the room has to make its way back into the original position, but they only have 2 shifts before that happens. With this, Quentin regains his hope, as well as his dictatorial personality and evil agenda. He says they need to immediately run through the rooms ignoring the traps, but Worth reminds him that he threw out their last boot. Levin also points out that she can technically identify the traps from the numbers, but she can't calculate and factor numbers of this size without a computer. I mean, I had to use a calculator in exams to check if 2 + 2 = 4, so what Levin has done so far is still pretty impressive. It looks like the group has hit another wall, but in the middle of despair, an unlikely hero rises. Kazan blurts out the correct answer, easily calculating the number in his head. The group is left in complete shock that Kazan is not only capable of this, but has been their secret savior all along. Levin asks him a few questions to confirm that he's right, and he answers everything correctly. He gives them the factors of all the rooms. Amazed, they test the first room. Of course, by test, I mean Quentin grabs Worth, aka his personal punching bag, and throws him into the next room. Luckily, it's safe, confirming Kazan's numbers. Kazan, my man. Once again, Quentin becomes increasingly hostile as they reach the end and bosses the group around. The look in his eyes is definitely evil, and Worth and Levin seem to pick up on this and start looking at each other seemingly with a plan. They go through the room, and as Quentin is entering, Worth closes the door on his neck until they can all run away from him. He comically chases them, but they bamboozle him and drop him into a room below, leaving him behind. Then they continue making their way through the maze. The rooms shift as they reach an edge, confirming their theory. But as they pass through, the rooms move again, splitting them up from Kazan, who is now the MVP of the situation. They hear him screaming, so they know he's nearby. Searching for Kazan, they take risks navigating the rooms until they find him. Then Levin finds the original room and screams for Worth to get back. They make it just in time before the room moves back to its original starting point, which should be at the exit. It turns out to be the room they started in, which means they should never have moved at all. Then they make it across to room 27, which is the bridge itself. Opening the door reveals the light, and they are overcome with joy. But Worth commits to horror movie logic and tells Levin that he won't be leaving, claiming he has nothing to live for out in the real world. Levin tries to convince him to go through, but suddenly, from out of nowhere, Quentin stabs her from behind. Enraged, Worth finally fights him but is overpowered, and Quentin stabs him as well, before making his way to Kazan. Running to the exit, Kazan tries to escape, but Quentin is halfway outside the room attempting to grab him. But Worth is still alive and catches Quentin hanging onto his legs. Quentin is then crushed between the shifting rooms in the movie's most gruesome death, definitely a fate this character deserved. Falling back inside, Worth decides to give up on escaping, choosing to die beside Levin, a trusted friend, rather than live alone in society. We see Kazan, the only survivor, on the exit bridge. It's hard to know if Kazan can even realize what has happened or tell people about this place. And so it ends with Kazan, ironically the most unlikely survivor, heading out into the light. I've got to say that this movie is very unique in its approach for a horror sci-fi movie. We are kept in the dark for the entire movie, which is something I personally love and think helped the movie out a lot. Even in the ending, we still don't have any answers. We only know what the characters were faced with, which is the numbering system and how it works. It's really interesting that there is actually a deleted scene from the final moment of the film showing what is outside the cube, but the director cut it thinking it would be better to not know. I think I'd agree with the director on this way, but there are a lot of other interesting details about this film which really make it a cult classic. For instance, one fascinating fact that really impressed me was about the characters' names. All the characters are named after famous prisons, with Kazan being a famous prison mental institute. The rest are Leavenworth Prison in Kansas, the French prison Rennes, San Quentin State Prison, and Holloway Prison in England. Even the filming was super unique. The whole project only took 20 days and the set contained just one cube which changed to different colors using gel panels. Since it was really time consuming to change from one color to another, the film was not shot in sequence, but rather color by color. I feel like the movie's storyboard really sums up the tone of the movie. It went something like this, if you can believe it. We only have money for one set, one room. That one room could represent a bunch of rooms that look identical. Well, a bunch of identical rooms would be a maze. So why does this maze exist? Why are our characters trapped in it? I think that's the plot. The movie was followed by a sequel, a prequel, and a Japanese remake that came out in 2021. None of these, however, lived up to the original as it was a pioneer in the genre. The Squid Game of the 90s, you could say. Well, this brings us to the end of today's video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel to get more videos like this one. Your support is so important. And tell me what you think about this film. Did you like the creative decision not to give us any answers about the cube? And where does it rank among your top sci-fi horrors of all time? Let me know in the comments below. I read all of them. And if you're watching till now, thank you. I'll see you in another video soon.